Hello, everyone. I'm Devin Thorpe, a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing, and I have the most impressive group of women leaders that I have ever had the opportunity to assemble for one of our discussions here at the Social Entrepreneur at Forbes. We have with us the CEO and/or founder of 8 different companies. These are 8 of the top women leaders in crowdfunding. Danae Ringelman, as co-founder of Indiegogo, Jenny Casson of Cutting Edge Capital, Jillian Hellman, CEO of Realty Mogul, Joanna Schwartz, CEO of Early Shares, Joy Schaffler, CEO of Leverage PR, Leslie Mansford, CEO of Razoo, Sally Outlaw, CEO of Peerbackers, and Sarah Hanks, CEO of CrowdCheck. Ladies, thank you all for joining me today. It's just an honor to have you.
Devin, it's pretty much the A-team for world domination that you have here.
Yes, and lest there be any question about it, I do feel dominated by this group. Okay. I feel outmanned and outgunned in every sense of the word. But I wonder, Danae, if we could invite you to kick us off a little bit with this discussion by sharing some of the data you've observed on your platform with respect to women participating in crowdfunding at Indiegogo.
Sure. So I should start by saying when I started working on Indiegogo, that story, I guess, starts back in 2002. I wanted to start a company basically to democratize finance after failing to raise money myself and watching my parents fail and watching a lot of filmmakers and artists fail at raising money, not for lack of heart and hustle, but simply for lack of efficient access to capital. So when I started Indiegogo back in 2008, crowdfunding wasn't even a word. The industry hadn't even been born. And so we launched it with the mission to democratize finance, where the people who succeed in raising money are the people who are willing to work the hardest and reach out and have an audience that cares. And as a result, what we did is we launched an open and global platform, which is what we are today. And we're in every country and distributing millions of dollars every single week. But what's interesting is that because we are open, and what that means is we don't have a curation process, we don't pick and choose who comes on our site, we literally have taken the approach that YouTube has, we have created a completely level funding playing field. And when you do that, biases go out the great example of that and data that shows that is if you look at the venture capital industry, only 3 to 8% of actually venture-backed businesses that raise venture funding are run by women. But on Indiegogo, 47% of campaigns that reach their funding target are run by women. So it just speaks to the fact that if you level the playing field, women do just as well as men.
Yeah, it is inspiring to think about that potential. I'm wondering, Joanna, if you would be willing to comment on what you're seeing in the early days here of Early Shares. Are women getting better than that 3 to 6 or 8% of venture capital through Early Shares, or is it too soon to tell?
In many ways, it's too soon to tell, and in fact, we are just beginning. Now that our platform is launched and we've closed our first set of deals, and the pipeline is growing tremendously, we're really focusing some outreach efforts towards the women entrepreneurs in our community and beyond. But I think Danae brings up a good point. We are a very highly curated marketplace. We are, as you know, in the equity crowdfunding space. So there's a tremendous amount of due diligence and curation that goes into the deals that wind up on our platform. And so far, at the moment, the majority of the applicants happen to be run by men, and that is just the fact of where we're sitting. I have a very strong affinity to supporting women entrepreneurs, and so we are actually just starting now with the outreach towards that group.
Well, thank you. And Leslie, I wonder, as you look at your site, which is traditionally a site for nonprofits, now you do personal campaigns as well, but are you seeing a similar pattern with women getting a fair share of the volume on your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, Razoo's sort of sweet spot is nonprofits and individuals using the platform really for causes. And just as Danae had said about the democratization of finance, we're really the democratization of philanthropic capital and providing sort of small organizations and individuals the sort of alternative funding to to grants and government funding. And we see lots of small women-led nonprofits leading the charge there. Lots of individual women are using the tools to fill the gap of funding.
It is inspiring to see so many women involved, and of course, the nonprofit world has somewhat traditionally been involved more women. But Sarah, I wonder if you would comment on why you think there are more women entrepreneurs. At least, I don't have the data. I have you as evidence that there are more women involved in crowdfunding than there are in the broader tech community. And I wonder if you would comment on why you think that is, Sarah.
Okay, well, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion about getting more women into the tech industry and getting more women coding and getting women to be better represented in Silicon Valley in general. But there's one thing that I've always noticed in 30 years of working in an essentially male-dominated field, and that is women do their homework. And so it's no surprise to me at all that in the early days of the securities market, the companies that Joanna is seeing, for example, we are seeing far more men. But I think the women will turn up when they have worked out what this thing is and how best to use it. They're not just jumping in without having done their homework. And as Joanna says, we would be very interested in helping any women do their homework to get to the place where they can use this tool properly.
Yeah. Devin,
yes.
Devin, if I may say, I think obviously crowdfunding is very much aligned, I think, with women's nature. We're collaborative by nature. We're good at social media, good at communication. So I think those really play into the strengths of women. So I think you'll see, continued evolution of women in crowdfunding.
Yeah. Well, I seem to have observed in my experience that there are more women participating in crowdfunding now. I wonder, Joy, as you have been really exposed to a broad array of people in the crowdfunding world, is it your sense that the crowdfunders, the crowdfund leaders, are we seeing more women, or have I just pulled the women out of a group dominated by men?
Absolutely. So we talk to anywhere between maybe 15 new people entering the month. It could be 20 or 30 or 40 if we're going to conferences or something like that. And is that there are quite a few women who are entering the space. They've left the finance world and they're looking at launching an industry vertical niche platform. We had a company, Fund a Feast, that was launching a crowdfunding platform for gourmet food. There's this amazing, strong women who are really smart with a great background who are on here today. You go to conferences, and I was at a private equity conference last week. I think I was one of 6 women, and 5 of them were booth girls. Not me, but it's crowdfunding is changing that. You go to these conferences in the crowdfunding arena, and there is a lot of very smart women who are who are going and getting in and actually owning the platforms and being part of it and really participating in a significant way. So absolutely, I'm seeing that.
Yeah. There's an interesting question that comes up in my mind when we talk about gender, and I want to be as sensitive as possible, but Jillian, I want you to comment a little bit about the fact you are among those on this panel that have raised venture capital yourself for your firm. And there's a lot of data about how women-led businesses are less likely to get venture capital. I wonder if you'd comment on your experience in raising venture capital in that context.
Yeah, definitely. The odds are stacked against you. I think it's something like, less than 7% of venture capital money goes to, a company where you have a woman founder. And I'm a female CEO. So I think going into it, I knew the odds were stacked against me. But I wouldn't say that I was treated any differently by venture capital firms. And I didn't expect to be. I think that at the end of the day, if you're running a good business and if you've got the proper team in place, you've got the proper traction in place, there is venture capital money available, but you may have to take more meetings. And I really experienced this when we raised our seed round as well. So we raised $1 million in our seed round. We just announced a couple of weeks ago that we did $9 million in our Series A. But in both, it's a numbers game, and you have to be willing to meet with the people. You have to be willing to share the story, share the vision, get people to buy in. So I went into it knowing that the odds were stacked against me, but I really don't think I was treated any differently. And I think that that's a stereotype, actually, that we want to try and squash as female CEOs, because you don't want to scare women from going in to get venture money. It's available. Most people, get no when they go to get venture money, whether it's males or females. I think that it's a result of, less venture backable companies that are being started by women than it is, an epidemic, if you will, in Silicon Valley. So I didn't experience that, but, it's daunting and it's scary. And I think that, there's a place for mentorship and a place for, encouragement for women CEOs, that there's absolutely venture money available to female-led companies, but you just may have to take more meetings because we're different, right? And most of the people that come in those offices in venture capital firms are men. Many times they've started other companies. Many times, they've already got a track record and history. So I actually found that being a first-time founder was more disadvantageous to me than being a female. So I had both those stacked against me. But the capital's available. It's just the determination, the gusto, and also the traction. Traction's really big when you go to get venture money.
Danae, you and Slava have raised a lot of money through venture capital. I wonder what your take is on this topic, just a little bit from your experience working with Slava and raising money. Danae, did we lose you? We may have lost Danae. Jenny, let me ask you a different question. Jenny, you have been kind of working in a little different niche corner of crowdfunding that I find very interesting. You've been doing this you've been doing securities type crowdfunding under a variety of different rules and regulations than the Jobs Act. Would you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing in direct public offerings?
Sure. So for the last 3 years, we've been working on investment crowdfunding under existing law, and we call the tool a direct public offering. So we're lawyers as well as fundraising consultants. So we understand very well the laws that govern capital raising. So we've identified ways to make it fairly easy to raise money under existing law from the public, from both wealthy and non-wealthy investors. And we've completed about 10 of those, and we have about 20 in the works right now. We also have a listing site for these kinds of offerings called cuttingedgex.com. And one thing that we do is we actually focus on social enterprises. So for-profits, non-profits, co-ops, hybrids, all kinds of organizations that are trying to do something good in the world in addition to making money for themselves and their investors. And what we find is a lot of those companies, even if they could possibly raise venture money, they don't want to, because there have been so many horror stories out there about what can happen to companies when they're venture-backed. And so they're looking for other alternatives. So that's why we've tried to really identify as many possible ways as we can to raise money without having to go to the VCs or focus solely on wealthy investors.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting opportunity to use existing laws to do crowdfunding type transactions. And so I find it a fascinating little corner of the crowdfunding world that you're in there, Jenny, so thank you. Danae, if you can hear me now, I wonder if you would be willing to comment on your experience with working with Slava to raise venture capital for Indiegogo. You've raised tens of millions of dollars over the years.
Yeah, we just closed our Series B round, which was a $40 million round led by IVP and Kleiner Perkins. I think the takeaway for us is we actually didn't raise our first round of capital. It took us 3 years, I would say, 3 years later than we originally intended, until we actually got the traction and we really started to prove that there were customers. And I think what what is so amazing about crowdfunding in general is that it's a vehicle for other businesses and designers and entrepreneurs to actually show traction in a marketplace. So we have campaign owners actually like Ariel, who invented a brain sensing headband called the Muse, or Joanna, who invented high-tech underwear. Both of them did actually not go the traditional venture route. They went to Indiegogo first and used it as a place to prove they had a market. So they actually each raised several hundred thousands of dollars to get their product launched. And in the process, they proved that there was a market. They refined their pricing. They refined their features and their colors and all that kind of stuff. Basically enabled them to get market data, market intelligence, to inform them who their customers are, where they are, et cetera, and that actually enabled them to launch in a more robust manner. And because of that data and that market proof that the Indiegogo campaign allowed, it actually helped them attract traditional investments. So in the case with the headband, they actually ended up closing a multi-million round of Series A funding after their Indiegogo campaign. And then with the case with the Knix underwear, they actually were able to get a very large distributor to take notice. And this is completely history being made simply because first-time manufacturers never get that kind of attention from distributors. So it's actually an incredible ecosystem that we're developing, and because of the market validation and the market-proof benefits that Indiegogo and crowdfunding offer, I think we're going to see more and more women have success because then they're going to attract the venture funding or the distribution based on data, not based on whether they can sell a venture investor behind closed doors. And if in that case you're still subject to potential biases at play, and so that's why I think that what's so great about crowdfunding is that it removes those biases and actually just allows the traditional financiers to look at the data and make their investment decisions based on true worth.
Now, it is inspiring to think about that, and as we think about the growth trajectory of crowdfunding, I'm curious, Sally, if you would help us think through a little bit as there are billions of dollars that have been completed in crowdfunded transactions on sites like Indiegogo every year for the last several years. It was, I think, nearly $3 billion in 12 and over $5 billion in 13, and we're looking at huge numbers for this year. But the data on Reg D 506C offerings is really kind of dwarfs those numbers. Sally, what are you seeing in terms of that Reg D 506C kind of marketplace? How's that developing?
I don't have a lot of data on that yet. It's they just lifted the ban on publicly soliciting for capital in September and making that sort of Reg D 506C available to people. I do see that real estate is the biggest. I know in terms of a sector. I work with Crowdnetic, and they do a lot of that kind of data crunching. And they said that real estate is by far the biggest 506C offering that's been getting support, mostly in California, of course. But we're actually supporting that marketplace. We have a content partnership with Reuters, and we help these equity campaigns get exposure to more and more investors. So if Reuters has a platform that goes to about 500,000 financial professionals and traders and investors. And so we take the equity campaigns that are actually raising under 506C and try to give them additional exposure. So we're sort of focused not as much on the platform right now, like some of the other women here. We're really focused on sort of servicing the whole industry as it grows. We notice that there's two big pain points. One is education. I think a lot of people, as some of the other colleagues were talking about, they don't necessarily know how to run a successful campaign. They don't even know, what a great opportunity it can be for their young companies. So we do a lot to educate the women about that. And then we also give them exposure through our media partnerships, like on Reuters, on Entrepreneur, on Market Watch, etc. So there's a lot of activity happening.
Well, as we talk about real estate, of course, that we've got to be looking at our good friend Jillian here. Jillian, why do you think real estate is taking off so quickly in this investment crowdfunding world?
Yeah, so just to address Reg D 506C and then your question directly, Devin. So we are doing probably the most widely recognized Reg D 506C, maybe in crowdfunding ever. We're crowdfunding right at the tail end of crowdfunding, the Hard Rock Hotel in Palm Springs. we just got data back from our media partners. We had 110 million media impressions on a single crowdfunded hotel. So I think from a coverage perspective, it may have been, one of the most widely coveraged crowdfunding offerings in the media. And I think that real estate makes sense because it's tangible. People understand it. There's this education issue around investing in early stage startups. There's even an education issue around investing in media or movies or art projects. And I think that you overcome some of that in real estate. People understand what it is to invest in real estate. It's physical, it's tangible. They understand how a hotel works. They understand how an apartment building works. So I think that, we have, while we still have education challenges, we don't have to explain the asset class. The asset class is well understood throughout the population. There's also this concept of cash. We are cash flow investors at realtymogul.com, and we've distributed back more cash into the pockets of our investors than I think any other crowdfunding company in any vertical. If you're looking in equity crowdfunding with startups, the anticipation is that you may not get money back for 10 years or 15 years. If you're on a Indiegogo or a Kickstarter, they're donation-based platforms, you're not getting cash back. We send hundreds of emails every month that says, you've got money. And we're actually distributing millions of dollars back into the pockets of our investors. And I think that concept of cash flow has built some virality into the real estate space.
It's interesting. Joanna, I wonder if you would comment a little bit about the startup community that you're helping to finance. It seems that investors are taking to this a bit more slowly than some of us in the crowdfunding community had hoped. What's your take?
I think some of the same challenges that we were talking about earlier with just this group raising capital for our own businesses. The reality is when you are out raising money, there's a big learning curve and a big gap between online and offline. And a lot of what we're doing is we're moving the offline process online, and certainly it makes it a lot more simple, and there's transaction management and there's visibility and a central location to manage the transaction. But a lot of that personal interaction is still happening. So a lot of our efforts on the startup side are really helping people bridge the gap between the kind of old school way of raising capital and the new way of raising capital, and that is really starting to work. And so the combination of the startup community coming on board and bringing their own network of investors and giving them a central place to make the investment and participate in those transactions where they ordinarily wouldn't have had. And then also bridging the gap and expanding and syndicating the deal through our network of accredited investors and beyond, using some of the syndication tools that we've already been talking about. But it's also, I think the point
Oh no.
About curve is very critical, and we're really investing in quality and providing transparency and cash flow to the investors. We are so we're focused. Actually, we're launching our real estate platform imminently. We're also launching a fund as
Joanna, it sounds like we've got a little technical difficulty there, but I think you said that you are launching a real estate platform and a fund platform as well, which is very interesting, and we certainly wish you success with that. I wonder, Joy, if you would just comment a little bit about what you're seeing develop in terms of best practices around the 506c space, as we see people trying to do these new offerings where they're doing a general solicitation. There must be we must be beginning to see some best practices, and yet it's difficult to document them in these early days. Joy, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think, from the platforms that we work with. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Devin?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, so the platforms that we're working with, the companies who are going through it, kind of following marketing best practices and just because you're raising capital and just because you can say, hey, you know, this deal is at 20%, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best strategy as far as attracting investors goes. You know, and Jillian, you may have found something different when, you know, you've gone through the process, but I think it's still, you know, being conservative, you know, always kind of discussing the potential risks to show people that you understand how to structure a deal, showing people you understand kind of what might go wrong and have a contingency plan for it, and not just kind of painting a picture of everything being perfect and just making 20% returns or whatever it is, but showing people kind of a more well-rounded, you know, picture of what's going on there.
Sure. Now, Leslie,
it's always best to just kind of market and then.
Sorry, Joy. We got a little bit of a sync problem with you, but I apologize for that. Leslie, I wonder if you would just comment on the opportunity for nonprofit startups to get traction using crowdfunding.
Sure. I mean, we've basically seen the nonprofit side of crowdfunding, I think, just really grow after, you know, since the last couple of years. I think nonprofits have always been a little bit slower to embrace technology. And one of the things that I think you know well, Devin, that we've tried to do is to engage nonprofits in these 24-hour days of giving as a really easy way, a sort of win-win, where they're trained to build their online fundraising capacity. They try it for the day, they do really well, and then they have those tools, you know, forever. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity around online giving, around online fundraising, and it's exciting to see, you know, smaller nonprofits really embracing the tools right now, and also the larger nonprofits figuring out how they can incorporate crowdfunding, you know, into their larger suite of fundraising tools. So lots of opportunity there.
Well, it is exciting, and you know, you mentioned the community giving days. I think the Razoo record for one day is a little over $17 million with the Minnesota campaign. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. We were excited last week to do our Silicon Valley Day of Giving, which raised $8 million, which was pretty good for the first go-around.
Yes, but boy, they got to step up if they want to beat Minnesota. Those Minnesotans have it figured out. That's really great. So, Sarah, as you think about this industry, you're focused on sort of making it work, helping the back end logistics and serving all of these platform companies. So you've got a pretty good perspective on the especially the investment crowdfunding side. What's your take on the future of the Title III of the Jobs Act crowdfunding, where we're really talking about the authentic crowdfunding of going to ordinary investors, ordinary people, and asking them to invest? What's your take on what's going to happen there?
Okay. Well, I think one of the most important things is the fact that crowdfunding by its nature accelerates the complexity in a company's life. Because it used to be when a company was doing the offline capital raising that a couple of our colleagues here have talked about, if the company wasn't quite ready, the friendly angel investors on the other side of the desk would say, here, let me help you through this. And you don't have that. When you go online, whether it's 506C or whether it's Title III crowdfunding, you've now got to a situation where you have to be ready for prime time. You can't think that you're offering preferred when you haven't registered preferred with your state authority. Or you can't be saying, yeah, my cap table looks like this, and I think I've issued 60% of the shares to Uncle Fred, when Uncle Fred's records show that it's 50%, or somebody's not filled out the share certificates. So it's going to be even more important in Title III crowdfunding that companies just get the basic housekeeping right, because there's no way that this new class of investors are going to be able to say to a company, well, you know, I've looked at your product looks great, but show me your cap table and show me all of the paperwork behind you. That's just not a skill set that normal people have. So our experience so far with the 506c companies is 85% of the companies we've dealt with had something wrong with their corporate structure. And in a couple of cases it was fatal. They had to go back and do rescission offers. So the thing that's going to be super important is companies have to come to this new crowd with all of their corporate housekeeping done. Otherwise, something's going to go wrong, people are going to lose faith, and then the whole industry collapses. So we've got, all of us have to make sure that those companies present to the new investors correctly so the new investors can trust them.
Oh, well, ladies, I would like to keep going for hours, but I notice our time is up. It has been just a joy to visit with you. I thank you very much for your time and certainly wish you every success. I would note that in the Forbes piece that accompanies this interview, this discussion, that there are links to all of the websites for your respective organizations, as well as a smattering of other links to some of your Facebook sites, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you all for joining me this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, John. Thanks.
All righty, let's do some good.